All right, welcome along to the RTÉ Soccer Podcast. Raf Diallo here. You can watch along or listen in every week on RTÉ.ie, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Another busy episode to come. Later on, we'll talk about the League of Ireland title race, Shamrock Rovers' next European match, and we'll also look at the recent rise of their opponents, Larne. Plus, it's another Champions League week with a live TV game on Wednesday. All that to come with Barry Murphy, David McMillan, and RTÉ Sport's Niall McCoy. But we're going to start by reviewing yesterday's FAI Women's Cup final and building up to the start of the Euro 2025 playoffs with the Ireland women's team facing Georgia in the first leg live on RTÉ this Friday. So I'm delighted to be joined once again by former Ireland international Méabh De Búrca and by RTÉ Sports Anthony Pyne. I hope you're both keeping well. You survived the win there yesterday anyway, Méabh.
Just about, yeah. I think it was the worst conditions I've ever done a match in anyway. Yeah, it was wind like I'd never seen it before.
Yeah, and Anthony, yourself as well. I mean, it's there. Like, I suppose people don't necessarily feel sorry for the journalists that go out to cover games, but at the same time, it's they're tough conditions for everybody on the pitch and off the pitch.
Yeah, I hand glided in to Tala yesterday, Raf. We had a little bit of shelter in the ground, and actually, thankfully, the rain held off until just after the game. So it could have been worse, but yeah, it was difficult, and I'm sure we'll touch on this. It did impact the game itself. I think there's no question about that. If you only have to look at some of the goals that were scored, so that was a shame. But yeah, it was gusty.
Yeah, and first half certainly was a bit of a whirlwind. Shelbourne and Athlone scoring all their goals in that half, but ultimately Shelbourne scoring 6 and Athlone scoring 1 in a scoreline I don't think anybody would have predicted, let alone by half time. But let's first listen to the Shelbourne players and manager as well, and then we'll discuss what happened on the pitch and how things actually unfolded. So in this order, it's Noelle Murray, Kate Mooney, Captain Pearl Slattery, and then manager Owen Weirin, all speaking to Valerie Wheeler.
Noelle, the atmosphere is electric. You've done it. You're cup champions. How does it feel?
Look, I think it's been a tough season for us. I think we're too good of a squad to not have any silverware this year. I'm just really glad that we came out and performed and showed what we're made of.
Let's talk about that performance. The first half, goal after goal. Kate kicked it off, then your penalty, and then you added another. You must be happy with your own performance here today.
Oh, I'm absolutely buzzing, and I'm absolutely buzzing for the club and everybody involved in it. It's a day out for the club. It's not only for the players, and I think we really made a mark today.
Oh my God, this feeling is, I can't even describe it. This is the best feeling I've ever felt. From everything that I've been through to win this cup, I've been involved in this cups before, but I was never in the squads, and then to finally be in the squad, to play, to score, to win it, what a feeling.
Can you describe how it feels to be out here with your friends and maybe the people that you've played with all year, and you finally get over the line after maybe the upset of last year?
Yeah, oh my God. Playing alongside my best friend Alex, we've been friends 15 years, played since we were a baby together. To be able to win this for her and to go through, we've went through ups and downs the whole of life together, and to do that with her is the best feeling ever. And then playing with all the girls since I was 16 as well, I know them all my life. They're more like family than friends, and to do this with them, it's just amazing.
The years have flown by, but I love playing for this club. And what a day for everybody. As I said, I just think we've deserved it. To end it with silverware, but I also said to the girls before the game, you don't get what you deserve in football. It's a very harsh game. We go out and we put a top performance in, and I mean, you couldn't ask for anything else. And we'll enjoy tonight now the next few days.
I look over the moon, but it's no more than the players deserve. This year the staff have deserved. Since we've been in for pre-season, I said there was a hunger in the group after last year not winning a trophy, and I've seen that for the last 9 or 10 months, and these players deserve this. They deserve a day like today. I feel like all the emotion was used up in the quarter-final against Rovers. Today was, it was one of those unusual halves where every shot we took seemed to go in, and but look, the professionalism, we talk about the squad, the players that we're bringing on. I just couldn't be happier for the girls in the club today.
Yeah, as Owen Weirin says there, Méabh, it was an unusual half. I think everyone would agree with that, and both in terms of the scoreline, just how things played out. But from that lone point of view, straight from the beginning, when news filters through that Laurie Ryan won't be starting, as captain and leader, it already starts off on a kind of sour note, and then sort of these mistakes start filtering in early in the half, and they just don't seem to recover from there.
Yeah, I think her unavailability definitely influenced the game. I think they kind of were missing that leadership in the middle of the park, and like I said, I think once the goals went in at that point, they just seemed to the floodgates just all opened at once, and maybe with that leadership might have brought a bit of more experience just to limit the damage, at least get them into half time still in the game. But unfortunately for Athlone, it wasn't the case. And on the flip side, like Shelbourne were just unstoppable, unplayable. I think they were really everything they touched seemed to go in the back of the net, and all their goals, like I said, came in such quick succession as well. It was just one after the other, and some of them were very similar. Like you had 2 from corners, the second phase of corners, and then you had 2 from crosses in from their left wing as well that looped over the centre backs' heads, and different players involved in all the different occasions of the goals. But it was a really unusual first half, like you said.
Yeah, I guess we'd also spoken about Kate Mooney and her impact in the league and in the run-in. To obviously Athlone got over the line, but from a Shelbourne point of view, she was the one that really kept them in the title race in terms of the goals. But it's her sort of a decision to make that run and get in and nip in ahead of Katie Keane sort of almost sets the tone for it, because it's sort of an error from Athlone, but at the same time, it kind of shows Shels' hunger.
Yeah, definitely. You could just see she was kind of such a live wire and just really on it from the very start. And it was only to Katie Keane's defence, like it was literally a split second, I think, that she was late, and it seemed slight hesitancy. And I mean, it's just so costly. It's just fine margins when you're up against the likes of Shels. And then I think the second goal, the penalty was probably unfortunate as well to concede. And I think that was really pivotal, because it really swung the tide, I think, in favour of Shels, because prior to conceding, Athlone had started relatively okay, they didn't have many huge chances, but they weren't, they still started all right and were in the game. But once the goals started flowing in, I think that was the end. Yeah,
and at the same time, Anthony, Athlone were sort of out of sorts at the same time as well. And then obviously with the floodgates sort of opened at the other end as well, they just never got going.
They never got going. I agree with Méabh. I mean, it was a huge loss for them to lose their captain, Laurie Ryan, before kickoff. She had been carrying a niggle, I think, for the last couple of weeks, and just couldn't quite fully overcome it, and actually didn't feature at all yesterday. And I think really, when getting a bad start obviously is never ideal, but when they shipped the couple of early goals, I think that in particular her loss was magnified, because they were in such dire need for somebody to get the group together and just get them through that period. Get to half time 2-0 or even 3-0 down, would have been kind of okay, because you're not completely out of it. But they got to the point that they conceded 3 goals in the 6 minutes running up to half time. And I think if that first half had gone for another 3 minutes, they would have conceded 2 more, because they were absolutely all at sea. I think their heads just went. And it was a shame, Raf, because for a lot of people tuning in, they may not have seen that Athlone team all season and haven't been watching them. And that is not a representation of what they are. They're the league champions, deserved league champions. And I just think perhaps also the conditions, they certainly didn't adapt to them as well as Shels, but they are a little more direct than Shels, and they'd like to use longer balls a little more. And obviously with that wind in the first half, Shels actually played against the wind in the first half. So a lot of Athlone's passes and balls and crosses were being overrun or going too heavy. I think Shels played it very cute. They played deep and they just swallowed up the likes of Maddie Gibson. Brenda Tabay she did get a goal, but she wasn't really in the game. And it was emphatic in the end, and nobody saw that coming. It was just one of those freak 45 minutes of football. But that can happen when you freeze on a big stage like that. And Shels have such class and experience that they will fully punish you, which they did.
Yeah, and obviously a tough halftime team talk for Ciaran Kilduff, who's now, of course, confirmed that he's leaving the Athlone Town job. Let's just listen to what he had to say.
Look, the best team won on the day. They're a brilliant team. We knew that. It was probably a sobering afternoon for us a little bit, especially in the first half. We're better than that, but look at it. It is what it is. We had a young team out there as well at times. I think we had 9 players under the age of 22, and it probably showed a little bit at times. But credit to the girls. Listen, we've had a brilliant season. It's not a nice way for it to finish, but we'll lick our wounds, we'll dust off, and we'll take it on the chin.
Was it maybe a mistake to kick with the wind in the first half?
Maybe, yeah. You don't know. I'm still trying to figure out the wind. It's one of those days here. It's blowing everywhere. So look, it's no excuse. It was the same for both teams out there, and they handled it better. But look, as I said, their experience came through, and listen, they punished us, and I think in the second half to come out and just keep going. That's all I asked at half time. They don't teach you that in the coaching licence when you're 6-0 down and then 6-1 down at half time, what to deliver to your team, but to keep going and not give up. And listen, credit to Shelbourne, they deserved it, and as I said earlier in the week, if we weren't going to win it, I was delighted they did.
All right, so Ciaran Kilduff there, and then obviously later on, as I said, he confirmed he was moving on from the Athlone Town job. But Maeve, I suppose, looking at it, it's a small victory in of itself, I suppose, in the second half that it was kept to 0-0, even though obviously the final scoreline reads 6-1. But in terms of Athlone now going into next season, obviously looking for a new manager, being league champions, which I think can't be forgotten despite what's happened there, just the double went away from them in kind of spectacular fashion. But where do they stand now going forward?
Yeah, I kind of see next year nearly as rebuilding for Athlone, even though they are league champions. I mean, it's just they seem to be a little light in their squad, and that probably showed at the end in the final there. And you know, they did really very well to get and see the league out. I think just given the, I suppose, the maybe lack of depth in their squad, but also they were hit with injuries. The likes of you know, Brown suffered an ACL, and then Singleton is out with a long-term injury as well. So two of them won't be available. And then, you know, it's the likes of the overseas players, whether they'll be coming back next year, I suppose that remains to be told. So it's difficult to know that I'm sure they'll definitely have to like that recruit and rebuild and try to get players up from their academy teams as well. And obviously the appeal of the Champions League is going to definitely attract some players to the club as well next year.
Yeah, and then before we touch on the overseas players in terms of the future in terms of the league, Anthony, I suppose as an occasion, what did you make of it? And especially when it comes to attendances, it was 3,118 in the end in Tala, which was down on last season, and of course the high point, which was 2022, which was about 5,000 of an attendance.
Well, I mean, I think the attendance was disappointing. You know, I think once you hit that high water mark of what it was over 5,000 in 2022, you know, you want to keep that going. You never want to go backwards. Now, there's extenuating circumstances. The weather obviously wouldn't have helped. I think the fact that this was the third final in a row between the same teams, so it loses a bit of its novelty factor. But yeah, you'd have to say that the crowd was a bit disappointing. Those who were there were great. You know, both sets of fans made lots of noise and brought loads of colour to it. But then, you know, the game dictates that as well, because it was over very quickly. I mean, it was a non-event of a second half. But look, you know, we'd hope for another spike next year to make this. Obviously, this game now being its own event, it's a standalone match as opposed to being played on the same day as the men's cup final as it used to be. So I think, you know, across the board, we all collectively, and the FAI certainly would want to be pushing this to get bigger than that. You know, I think there has to be that ambition, and I'm sure there is, but maybe they'll look at that going forward and what can be done to get that number higher, because I think if it's in and around 3,000 again next year, let's say there's two different teams in the final, you know, this time next year, or even if it is Shels and Athlone again, you know, you don't want to stagnate. You know, you want to keep on moving forward and keep pushing this, as we've seen in ladies, for example, the ladies Gaelic football, what the GAA, the LGFA have done with that in terms of year on year driving it up and up and up, becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, we want to see similar. So we'll say from that perspective, you know, it was a little disappointing, but you know, for anyone who was there and turned out, as I said, they brought lots to it and lots to the occasion, but obviously it was very one-sided affair, so not a great amount of jeopardy or tension in it, unfortunately, Raf.
Yeah, and obviously from a wider league perspective as well, the overseas players, Maeve, which you kind of touched on very briefly already, obviously they bring a huge benefit to the teams they do play for, but you see sort of pros and cons in terms of, you know, especially when it comes to short-term visas, with that sort of govern their appearances in the league.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, a lot will come after they graduate in America, predominantly, and you know, they'll be entitled to 1-year graduate fees at that point. But then it's just a matter of trying to keep them then for longer, or also if their own circumstances allow. And there's no doubt they definitely bring up the standard of the league, and you can see them, like there's at least two overseas players in the starting 11s of the top three, like Galway, Shels, Athlone, even Treaty as well, obviously recruited highly from overseas this year. But yeah, it's yeah, like I said, pros and cons, because often then as well, if you do have kind of nearly a mass exodus in one off season as well, it can affect a team going forward too. And also, I suppose, you're trying to provide opportunities for the young talent, the Irish girls coming through as well. And yeah, I think they definitely, there's a lot of benefits to bringing, attracting those players into the league for sure, because you can see that the standards are rising year on year when they do come into.
Yeah, and then someone who is also coming in, or an entity, let's just say Waterford FC, due to come into the league next season. So it won't be an odd numbered league. It's obviously 11 clubs at the moment. That will be up to 12. You feel there's going to be an impact, or at least that there's potentially, if you're looking at it from a Wexford and a Cork City point of view, in that catchment area, that there's a potential impact there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I suppose there are teams that can't afford to lose players. The likes of Wexford, they did have a really good second half of the season. In fairness, they end up finishing fourth, and from their own standards, have obviously been previous league winners at multiple occasions as well as the cup. And they will look to be pushing up, right up, challenging next season. And Cork as well, towards the lower end of the table. They're trying to build all the time down there. So definitely another team in the league. It kind of has positives. Like I said, 12 teams. It means that teams aren't idle in weeks as well, which definitely I think kind of takes away from the league. I think it is always good to have an even number of teams, but definitely a new entity is going to pull players from that catchment area. So we'll just have to see how that unfolds next year. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, now as the domestic season comes to an end, of course, now we're fully focusing now on the international scene, and very pivotal period for the Republic of Ireland women's team with the Euro playoffs beginning. So this Friday, live on RTÉ2 and the RTÉ Player from 4:30, Ireland are away at Georgia, and that's the first leg. And then next Tuesday then is the Georgians are coming to Tallaght Stadium, and obviously the squad was named last week, largely the same core, but Anthony, obviously a few injury issues, a couple of players coming back as well, and then there's Courtney Brosnan as well, suspended for the first leg.
Yeah, that's right. A couple of sort of notable omissions. Lucy Quinn, I think, count herself unlucky. She's playing really well at Birmingham City. She's player of the month there for September. Has started the season very strongly. Saoirse Noonan has done likewise at Celtic. Emily Whelan has done really well at Glasgow City. Emily Murphy, I think, would have been in that squad, but she hasn't been released. Excuse me. She's playing college soccer in the States, and she hasn't been released. So look, there's depth, and that's on top of as you mentioned, Raf, the injuries. The players that are missing due to injury. Courtney will miss the first leg. She got 2 yellows during qualification. Actually both for time wasting, and it's caught up on her, so she'll miss the first leg. But look, if you're gonna pick a game, with all due respect, if we're gonna pick one game for Courtney to miss, I think this is the one that we picked. That this should be a formality. In fairness, over 2 legs, Ireland just have to be professional and get the job done. But yeah, look, I think you were probably touched on this anyway, but like the main debate around that squad selection, where it was the remarks of Ciaran Kilduff in the couple of days beforehand with regards to League of Ireland players and the amount of opportunities that they're getting within the Ireland setup. And then Eileen Gleeson responded to that on the day that she announced her squad. But I think before we get into that, I think, look, when you see the players that I've just named, all in full-time professional setups who aren't in this squad, who just haven't made it, that tells you the kind of strength and depth that Ireland currently have. The standards have gone up. It's a difficult panel to get into, so that's good. That's good, but obviously these things are subjective, and there'll be lots of debate around it every time the squads drop.
Yeah, and you had the perfect segue there for me, because that was the next topic I was going to bring up. And obviously there are 3 domestic-based players in the squad for these 2 legs against Georgia. So that's Katie Keane of Athlone Town, Eva Mangan of Cork City, and then Julianne Russell of Galway United as well, who we'll discuss, because of course she was up doing media duties today. But can you maybe just talk us through what Ciaran Kilduff said and the context of that, and then obviously Eileen Gleeson's response, and obviously she felt what Ciaran Kilduff had said was misrepresentative.
Well, I mean, he aired a frustration that from his point of view, Athlone had just won the league. Athlone Town had just won the league. They were preparing for the cup final. They would have a few under-19 internationals within the squad, including Katie Keane, who has been named, who was subsequently named in the senior squad, although she's also in the under-19 squad for 2 games against Belgium. So I'm not sure that she'll actually be in the match. Well, she won't. I'm sure she won't be in the match day squads for the Georgia game. I think she'll probably just spend some time in training camp along with the senior players. But his frustration was that he said he had no communication from anybody involved in the Ireland management setup with regards to particularly those younger players that he has. He sort of felt that they weren't being watched, or that was the feeling that he had, and that they needed more encouragement. They needed to believe that management were paying attention to what they were doing in this league, and maybe just to spur them on and to give them a bit more belief that they can make that step up into the Ireland fold. Eileen Gleeson rejected any suggestion that they're not being watched. She said they are. She pointed out that Emma Byrne had actually gone to an Athlone Town training session to watch Katie Keane. And that was when she said that it was a misrepresentation to say that they weren't paying attention to what is going on in the League of Ireland. And of course, Eileen has been steeped in the domestic game here for a very long time, so I think she was a little bit hurt by that. So look, it's like everything. There's a bit more nuance to all this, Raf. I can actually see both points of view. Ciaran Kilduff referenced Julianne Russell as an example, a player who has stepped up from the League of Ireland and done extremely well. As such, she's the shining light to show that it can be done. But Julianne is the exception that proves the rule, in my opinion. She is an outlier. Like, she came in when she was recalled in July. She had 60 caps behind her. She had 60 international caps behind her. So this wasn't a shock to the system for her to go into that kind of level. She had spent years playing at that sort of level. She is extremely fit. We spoke to her this morning. She was telling us about her regime. She basically lives like a pro. She knows what that takes and what it means. So she does CrossFit. She does extra gym work, extra running every day. She ran the New York Marathon a couple of years ago, like 3 hours, 48 minutes or something crazy. She's physically an incredible athlete. So there's a huge difference between that and a teenager who's the highest level that some of these players or all of those young players have played to date is the League of Ireland. Like, that is a massive difference. The jump for them to go into that senior setup, not that it does them any harm. It's brilliant for them to go in and train alongside Katie McCabe and Denise O'Sullivan, but it's unfair really to expect them to be able to adjust straight away. I think the bigger sort of point around all this is that they need a bridge. They need a segue between, we have an under-19s Republic of Ireland women's team, and then the next step up is the senior women's team. And there does need to be something in between, an under-23s team, which has been talking about for a long time now. There's a real need for that, because although the senior team making that step up may seem beyond a lot of the younger players in the league, an under-23s team is much more attainable. And if you can step into that kind of standard and do really well, then, it makes sense that, okay, now it seems less of a big jump to go into senior games. So, that's apparently been in the pipeworks for a long time. And Julianne actually suggested today that she thinks it's imminent, is what she said, was the word she used. So we'll see what develops on that front. But I do think it is needed.
Yeah, because Eileen Gleeson has said herself in the sort of additional comments from last week, League of Ireland players are in direct competition with players who are in professional environments and full-time environments. So the primary message from that is we're constantly watching players. So Méabh, I suppose in the wider context, how big a gap do you feel exists between, say, the League of Ireland and what is international standard? And do you kind of feel that the under-23s is just something that needs to be brought in, as Anthony said, in terms of what Julianne Russell said, imminently?
Yeah, it does need to be definitely brought in imminently, but to be honest, we've been talking about this for 15 years. It's not a new concept. Under 23s, many other national teams around the world have it, and it sounds like it's just repetitive. To be honest, it gets kind of old when you hear it. When I was that age, under 19, I knew that if you didn't get into the senior squad straight away, your international career is pretty much over, because it was going to be very, very hard that if you didn't break in as a teenager, the chances of doing so after were going to be very difficult. Well, more so back then, because the chances of professional contracts were limited. And I know, even like from my own experience, I got called into seniors when I was still under 19, but then at that stage I knew there was still a gap, because I was just getting kind of in and out, and there was no, like that after under 19, there was no other outlet. So I ended up going on a fast training course with boys for a year to try to bridge the gap there, to try bring myself up to senior level, and luckily by the end of that I'd been kind of called into the squads more so. But yeah, there's definitely a gap there. It needs to be bridged, and if they're talking about funding and lack of funding, then they need to just implement something like the combined colleges team that was there in the past as well. And there used to be World University Games team, but it's not a sport anymore, the University Games. But even just to have combined colleges, get the players, the majority of those in their early 20s are in colleges around the country, just bring them into a central location. Like it's not going to take a lot of money, or do it regionalised, get provincial regions centres in place, get those in Dublin training together, those in Connacht. It doesn't really take much funding, and those extra trainings will definitely benefit the girls before they get hopefully get the under-23s up and running. But I don't know, we've been a long time waiting, and I don't know, hopefully it comes around soon, but I can't see it anytime soon, to be honest.
Yeah, and do you feel it's sort of exacerbated as well? There was a generation of players who were going from the league, and very young players going from playing in the league, but also getting international caps, the likes of Jess Sue, Abby Larkin, Jess Stapleton, but they all moved on quite quickly to clubs in England or Scotland as well. And there was a core of those sort of players. So I presume just the fact that it's also a selling league in a certain sense exacerbates it as well. And then on top of it, the no home-based training sessions since the end of Colin Bell and Vera Pauw's time as well.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. And like Auntie said, I can definitely see the both sides of the Ciaran Eileen argument, if we want to call it that. And I think Ciaran's argument was that you needed a carrot to kind of dangle so that the players knew that they were kind of reaching for something higher, and like that, it's very disheartening as a 18 or 19-year-old when you finish playing, and obviously you had the buzz of playing for Ireland underage, and it's very hard to see then after that, along with the fact that we're implementing the granny rule, like to an extent that there's less and less places for Irish born players in the squad too, as time goes on. So you're really, the chances of making it, I don't know the percentages, but they're going to be very small as a under-19 international to making it now to the senior team. So yeah, if they could just have something like that in between, just to kind of give more of an opportunity for girls. And yeah, it is, it's definitely appealing to be able to go abroad and live the lifestyle of a full-time athlete. It's definitely appealing. I did it myself for a couple of years, and you want girls to continue to do that. But then on the flip side, you look at, like you said, Abby and Izzy, just mentioned them, the two of them are on the bench at the weekend, for their teams. And then, you do wonder, it depends. It's all about timing, I think, and individual choices as well, what's right for each player.
Yeah, and of course, in the shorter term, of course, Friday's game against Georgia. Now, they were in League C in the Nations League, and they finished second behind Belarus. Obviously, there's a couple of quirks in that group, just with Lithuania and Belarus not playing each other in direct matches. Lithuania forfeiting their games, and which officially means they lose those 3-0. But Georgia finished second. They did get promoted up to League B, but they're ranked 118th in the world, Anthony, and Ireland 24th. But I think the most recent, I suppose, comparison we can make is just from the most recent World Cup qualifiers, where the gap is 20 goals to 0, and one can imagine that gap wouldn't have closed that much in that space.
They got a couple of wins. They bet Cyprus and they bet Lithuania. Cyprus are 133rd in the world. Lithuania are ranked 106th. I guess that kind of shows that the benefit, one of the pluses of the Nations League, is that it offers a country like Georgia an opportunity to actually get some positive results against teams in and around their own level. But on the flip side of that, while they were playing Lithuania and Cyprus, Ireland were playing France, England and Sweden. So I actually think Georgia will have improved a little bit over the last 2 years. They got a new manager in. I think they'll be a little more organised. But I think Ireland have probably got stronger as well. And yeah, this really, from Ireland's point of view, they just have to do a professional job and get through the tie. But as I said, although I think Georgia will be better set up and more organised, it's, again, like we're talking about, like the levels and trying to bridge the gap, and what kind of standards are their players playing in, and what sort of fitness levels do they have and conditioning and stuff. Like, they might do okay for a half an hour and then really fade badly, because they are coming up against an Ireland team that had operated in League A and been competitive in League A, all in full-time pro setups, playing a lot of them in the Women's Super League, a very strong Women's Championship. Some of them, Katie McCabe is playing in the champion. Well, not just Katie now, but there's other players like Saoirse Noonan, as I spoke about earlier, is actually not in the squad at all. But across the board, players who are playing at a high level, and that's going to tell over 90 minutes, And then when you dip into your bench and Eileen Gleeson's able to bring on hungry players with a point to prove, That's going to tell. So look, as I said, from Ireland's point of view, they just you get through the tie. What can you do? You play what's in front of you. They have to be professional and patient and not over indulge themselves and trying to do too much of the ball and stuff like that. They have to do the right things and we move on through. But this should be I do expect it over 2 legs to be maybe not a 20-0, but maybe not too far off it either.
Yeah, and I suppose maybe a final point on that. During the Nations League, when it was previous to this League A involvement in League B, they did show the propensity to dispatch teams that are significantly lower ranked. So that might well be the template. But I suppose on the flip side as well, all eyes will sort of be on the other tie, which will be awaiting them in the final round of the playoff, which is either going to be Slovakia or Wales, and that's going to be the real litmus test. Obviously, they have to get through that and then hopefully qualify. But that's going to be I suppose what they're building towards is that, rather than, I suppose, Georgia itself.
Definitely, yeah. I think the 2 Georgian games are just going to be a formality, hopefully anyway, although judging off the cup final yesterday, we can't really predict things too much in advance. But no, I mean that everything aligns to that, and I think they'll be trying to. I think they'll nearly have their game plan almost looking ahead nearly to those games as well, and just important not to get any suspensions or injuries will be their main concern, I think, over the 2 legs. And the likes of Wales or Slovakia, then they're going to be the real test, because although on paper again we should beat those, it'll just be a real test. But yeah, I think it should hopefully give the girls a bit of confidence. It'll definitely be a bit of a transition, because like I said, we first went from League B to League A, and then now we're just getting used to playing those League A teams, and we have to change around the game plan again completely to be able to dominate possession and score those goals again. So yeah, you might see a bit of a transition, or maybe they mightn't start. They might need to be patient against Georgia. Like Anthony said, Georgia might end up being able to stay in the game for the opening half an hour or something, but after that I would imagine plenty of goals to go in from Ireland.
Yeah, so that first leg this Friday, live on RT2 and the RT Player coverage starting at 4:30, kickoff at 5 o'clock, and then of course the return game here in Tala, 7:30 kickoff on Tuesday. And of course we'll be back next Monday to review the first leg and also build up to the second leg. But for now, Méabh De Búrca and Anthony Pyne, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Raf.
All right, now I'm delighted to be joined by former Shamrock Rovers Pats and Bows keeper Barry Murphy and former Dundalk and UCD striker David McMillan. I hope you're both keeping well. We're obviously going to be talking about this title race that isn't going to be going away anytime soon, except maybe the next couple of weeks when it will be done and dusted. But we're going to start first on Larne against Shamrock Rovers, because this is, again, apart from the title race, it's another big week for the League of Ireland in Europe, and Shamrock Rovers, this stretch of 2 games that they have, first against Larne and Belfast and then against TNS and Tala, have been billed beforehand as the games they really need to win if they have any hope of getting through to the knockout stage. And while it is billed as a must-win, Barry, it's going to be a lot trickier than that, even if Larne aren't technically at home, given that they're playing away at Windsor Park in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That qualifying mark seems to be about the 7-point mark that people are talking about, that you need to get to the next stage. But listen, getting any sort of points in Europe is really tough, and this is probably the first time in a while that Shamrock Rovers will be coming through. As I was looking at the betting odds, and they're probably just slight favourites going into this game, but that doesn't matter in Europe. Shamrock Rovers have been the underdogs in a lot of games in Europe and got points and got really good results. And you look at some of the quality that Larne do have, and they've obviously progressed so quickly over 4 years since Kenny Bruce has come in with the money and got promoted. Won the league twice, back-to-back champions, and they beat Lincoln Redens and to qualify for this round, and put up a decent performance against Molde in the first round of games. And you just look at some of the players they do have. Some of the Derry fans listening will know Sam Todd and Jordan McAniff, who are surplus to requirements at Derry, but they've got good players in Andy Ryan up top, a couple of goals in Europe already this season, and Joe Thompson's a very good midfielder in who got a spell at Celtic as well. So they've got really good players as well. So listen, they'll fancy their chances against Shamrock Rovers as much as Rovers will going up there. And it's a really tough place to go and play up in Windsor Park. I played up there in 2013 against Linfield. It's really hostile, and the fans get right behind them. So it makes for a really good game.
Yeah, but the one area, David, where Rovers may have an advantage is the collective experience in Europe that maybe Larne are only building at the moment. I mean, you've had those experiences in Europe yourself, and as you kind of build through different campaigns, how much of a factor do you feel that's going to be?
Yeah, I think certainly even Rovers' previous game, you saw how they kind of managed it went down to 10 men, still managed to pull a point out of the bag. So I think that experience just showed even in that game alone. And as Barry said, it's a bit of a different task when you go in as favourites all of a sudden, and people are expecting you to win the game. That's very different to what Rovers are probably used to going in European matches, particularly in group stages, or well, they still call it a group stage. I suppose it is technically. But yeah, it's a different ask, I suppose. But I'll be watching the game on Thursday, expecting Shamrock Rovers to win, but it's never that straightforward. It's never that easy. So the mindset is slightly different for the players. But as I said, the experience that they've had over the years, across multiple campaigns now in Europe, it'll stand them in good stead. And I would fancy them to get the job done. I think, as Barry said, Larne have some excellent players and they've improved, but it is their first experience. And despite I know they lost 3-0 to Molde in the end, but they did hold them for a long period. So I've played out there. They're a very, very good team, Molde, generally, and that was an impressive enough performance from them. But I hope for Shamrock Rovers that they can go and win the game. And as Barry said, it really set them up well for the rest of the campaign and try and get out of the kind of group format if they can.
Yeah, we'll look at the minutiae of the tactics very shortly, but first we're going to learn about how Larne have got to where they are now and becoming back-to-back league champions, and then becoming the first NIFL Premiership side to qualify for European competition proper. So I was speaking to my RTÉ Sport colleague Niall McCoy, who's been looking into it over the last few weeks with interviews that you can read on RTÉ.ie, and I caught up with him for a short chat on Friday. All right, delighted to be joined by my colleague Niall McCoy. What's the crack, Niall? How are you keeping?
Raf, how are you keeping? How's things?
Yeah, not too bad. With Shamrock Rovers playing Larne, obviously we want to get a bit of a sense of where the club has come from, and you've obviously written a couple of pieces in recent times, one that's been published I think last month, and another where you've been speaking to the McInnes brothers, which is coming just in the build up to the game sometime this midweek. But the story of Larne, for people maybe who aren't familiar with them, they were nowhere for many years. I did a random thing, went back to the mid-90s, looked at the table then, 94-95, and Larne are cut adrift, bottom of the table, relegated, and they're basically nowhere bar a couple of top flight appearances in the 25 years or so from then on. But then 2017 is where things change for them, and a certain Kenny Bruce comes onto the scene.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story with a lot of threads. But yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there initially. Larne would by no means be considered an Irish League powerhouse. Very few teams outside Belfast would. In fact, like before Larne's first league title in 22-23, you'd have to go back to 2002 for Portadown, the first team from outside Belfast, actually, the last team before that to lift the league. Like, so Irish League football has predominantly been about Belfast, predominantly about the big two, Linfield and Glentoran, but obviously Cliftonville and Crusaders have had their spells on top. But Larne, no. Larne have never been up around that. They've had a couple of Irish Cup League final appearances that didn't work out. They've never been near a league title. And then Kenny Bruce, yeah, as you said, owner at the time of Purple Bricks, and put massive investment. He's a Larne man, wanted to put massive investment into his own club. Hasn't been shy about that at all. Put a lot of money into the club, Inver Park, a lot of redevelopment of the ground, started signing some really good players, and it's just sort of grown from there. I suppose after they came through the COVID period, and from the COVID period onwards, they've been pretty much the team up in the north, and back-to-back league titles for Larne. You had said that 10 years ago, you would have been laughed at, but they are right now the powerhouse in Irish League football, which is, especially with Linfield doing so well under David Healy at times, it's a really interesting and an unexpected situation.
Yeah, you mentioned David Healy there. Of course, people know him as a record goal scorer for the Northern Ireland team back in the sort of 2000s period, and played in the Premier League as well. Now, he features in the first feature that you wrote, and where you were speaking to David McDade, who has an interesting story. He's from Derry, played for Derry City at the start of his career. At some point later in his career, he ends up at Waterford, but then he wants to go back to Ulster, and he has options, and the big one being Linfield and getting signed by David Healy. But then Larne come on the scene, and on paper back then in 2017, it looks like an easy choice, that if you want trophies, you're going to go to Linfield. But he makes an interesting choice, as he tells you.
He does, and it's worth noting that Larne were in the Championship, the second tier at that time too, so it's not as if Larne were on Linfield's coattails at that stage. So Linfield essentially are supposed to the Man City. They're the big boys of Irish League. If you're not winning the league, when Linfield, it's seen as a disappointment, simple as that. So when they came calling, everyone just expected David was leaving Waterford after a season, wanted to come back up north. The feelers were out. A number of clubs, I think Sligo Rovers, Finn Harps, a lot of those northwest clubs, given where he's from, were interested. Linfield obviously made a big play. But the first person to contact him when he was leaving was Tiernan Lynch. So he went to Windsor Park, agreed or sat down, had a nice chat with David Healy, said, back in half an hour, I'll sign for you. This boy phoned me first, so I want to go tell him to his face that thanks, but no thanks. And then that meeting lasted more than half an hour, lasted an hour or two, and suddenly he had signed it on the dotted line. And the thing about this Larne team, they're always getting that mercenaries remark about them. It's always thrown at them, which is fair enough. That's something the club know that's going to be thrown at them. It's something they can't avoid. But I spoke to David, and he's like, yeah, okay, I understand why that, but he says to sit in the room with the likes of Kenny Bruce and Tiernan Lynch and hear, he says, everything they predicted they wanted to happen for that club has happened. He says almost to a T, their plan has been executed. He says people can throw whatever at them, but in terms of impressive football people and in terms of selling a football project, he says it was just a really exciting time.
Yeah, because you also spoke to Jordan McNeff. We'll touch on the kind of, I suppose, the brotherly side of the divide from this Thursday game. But from what David McDade tells you, and also from what Jordan McNeff mentions, both Tiernan Lynch and Kenny Bruce, they're very persuasive people in a sense, and the word vision comes up in both pieces in terms of they have an idea to sell, and in football that can be quite hard to sell because it's easy to be skeptical. But as you've said, there's a vision, and it does seem to bear fruit because they've made history in terms of Northern Irish clubs.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, you got to remember, Jordan left Derry in August, right in the heat of it, right when Derry were things. I know the last few weeks for all the top clubs have been a bit shaky, but back then Derry were going well. They're still in the cups, obviously still in the cup, and going very well in the league. So to leave at that stage in the season, knowing that there's a real chance of winners' medals with the club you're at, as you say, is that word, that persuasion, and that seems to be what they're selling this project on. Because it's okay having all this money and things, like you still have to get the right players in the door. And I think the club were particularly impressed with how that final UEFA Conference League qualifier to get through into the group stages. I think the fact that they went down to 10 men so early, and a stupid red card, something that happened in their first group game too, the character that showed after that to get through that game, and it was an excellent game. I watched it. It was a really, really entertaining game. I never thought today I'd see VAR at Inver Park, but I think that's to them, to the club, speaking of ones of the club, the fact that they had this character, like, you can, wages and all, whatever can come in it, but to have that guts to sort of dig in when it's against you, when you have history on the line, show them that they're making the right acquisitions in terms of player, not necessarily the most paid, but the right acquisitions, which is crucial.
Yeah, and they brought in some relatively eye-catching names. Mark Randall, I remember him from the Arsenal Youth Academy back in the days. I think around the time Jack Wilshere and the likes were coming through, there was that crop. They were getting opportunities in the Arsenal first team in the 2000s. And then there's the angle with Marcus Rashford, which I remember was a bit of a story last season, which got him into trouble a little bit with Eric Ten Hag. But he has a mate that he would have come through with at Manchester United, Roshan Williams, no longer at Larne, but was playing with them for a time last season, and that's the caliber of players they've been able to bring in, players who come through Premier League academies.
Yeah, Mark Randall played in the Champions League. He played against Porto, and he played, actually, funny enough, I was just going through his appearances, he played against Arteta, and there was a year, I'm sure people remember Arsenal winning 6-3 at Anfield, at a brilliant sort of League Cup run, an exciting League Cup run. Now, he was on the bench that day, he didn't get off the bench, but he was part of the squad at Anfield that day. He got on against, he played against West Brom, he played against Everton, he played against Porto out in Porto in the Champions League group stages. So this is a boy who's played at the very highest level with some of the very highest level players, or against some of the highest level players. And in terms of Rashford, wasn't so much the trip to Larne, but his excursion in the hours after. People will remember Ten Hag and the whole fallout from that and different things like that. And for a lot of people, that would have been the first time they heard of Larne. But he'd been actually over to visit the Youth Academy, I think, at that stage. And I think just, very nice fella, very much appreciated. But yeah. So, it's just gathering momentum. It's funny though, this year, as exciting as it is for Tiernan Lynch and the squad, must be very challenging. because they've got such a packed schedule, but there's a backlog developing too. Like, they're already 10 points off the pace in the league, and we're still very early doors, but they also have 4 games in hand. So there's going to be that backlog of games building up. And they've won the County Antrim Shield, which is another cup competition up there. So they're always involved. I think they've won 3 or 4 in a row or something like that at this stage. So it's a totally new environment for them, for a lot of those players, and players like Mark Randall, who have experienced sort of that. And he's not playing every minute these days, Mark. He's quite well on his career, but his experience, I'm sure, in times like this and weeks like these will be absolutely crucial. And obviously a lot of excitement coming up about the Rovers game, given it's an all Ireland clash. Not at Inver Park, at Winter Park, because UEFA regulations would allow them, but so many of those Larne players play at Windsor so often that won't really be much of a detrimental to them. And a lovely stadium, a lovely pitch. Larne play good football. They like to get 5 in midfield, Rovers too. So I actually think it'll be a really good match. I watched them against Mola in the first round, and they couldn't really get any attacking play going. But hopefully now in this round 2 there'll be a wee bit more sharpness about them up front.
Yeah, and of course then there's the brotherly side of it as well, in terms of both having one McInniff brother on either within either sort of squad, and so Aaron, who of course plays for Shamrock Rovers, and Jordan on the other side. I don't think they could have imagined that they would join both of those clubs, and that those 2 clubs would then get drawn together in the in a European group stage proper.
No, and the thing about it, they didn't. With the whole EA draw, I don't think they even realised that they could have been drawn against each other. And they've never played against each other. They've never, at senior level, they've never even played with each other at senior level. They just keep missing each other. And both of them have had knocks in recent weeks. And I'm just really hoping that both are fit and able to play, because, the first time playing against each other, as you say, I doubt they would ever imagine it's in a UEFA competition like. But just another interesting thread to the whole thing, to the whole match, and I imagine Rovers will bring a massive crowd up, because it's only an hour up the road, an hour and a half up the road, like, so it's not too far for them. But so seeing those 2 go up against each other, it'd be nice if they're both in the pitch at one time and get stuck into each other. It'd be good to see.
All right. Well, we're going to see. It's Thursday, of course, and we'll be reviewing that game next Monday anyway. But Niall, thanks very much for giving the insight on the Larne side of the story and how their rise has come about. Of course, people can read your pieces on rte.ie/sport, but also on YouTube underneath this video. You're going to find those pieces linked as well. So Niall, thanks very much for your time.
No problem, Raf. Cheers.
All right, so that is my RTÉ Sport colleague, Niall McCoy, and the first piece that was mentioned there, where he's been chatting to the likes of David McDade, that is titled Larne's Strong Brickwork Leading to European History. You can find that on rte.ie/sport. Second piece, which is going to be with Jordan McInniff, you can find that on the website in the next couple of days. Now, tactically, the way Larne have been setting up in Europe, it was a 5-4-1 against Molde. They tend to play 5-3-2, but I think from a Shamrock Rovers point of view, Barry, how would you like to see Rovers set up? Because they went for legs in midfield in the first game against Apoel, but there was a question whether they should bring in the likes of Jack Byrne or Dylan Watts from the start, and maybe add a little bit more creativity in the middle.
Yeah, they went for a 3-4-2-1 kind of formation against Apoel, and kind of looking for that, as you said, legs in the middle. Listen, you've got the quality of Graham Burke coming off the bench in previous rounds. You've got the informed Jack Byrne, I think, back to what he's been over previous years, and Dylan Watts running things in midfield. You've got a great chance. But what Rovers have used really well in the qualifying rounds is the legs of Aaron Green and Johnny Kenny up top. That's caused real problems, and it's a throwback to kind of old school centre forward play, really balls in behind and getting on the end of them. But it's caused massive problems for the kind of lower ranked teams, shall we say, in the early qualifying rounds. I think that's a position they'll see, just by the way Larne play with their centre halves, and just having a look at them as well. They don't look like the paces, the centre halves, and I think that's a real area that Rovers could exploit.
Yeah, and David, I suppose from your point of view as a former striker as well, how do you view it? Because there is that onus, as we've kind of said, with as Barry mentioned, with the odds at the moment that favour Rovers, which kind of maybe, and given that there is a potential there to get to a knockout stage, there is an onus to attack, and if you really want to have a shot at getting to the next round, you really need to be winning this game.
Yeah, I think the way Rovers have approached it, as Barry said, is to put legs in midfield in those European games. But my gut is that they'll try and treat this more as a league game than a European game. The style of Larne will be similar to what they're playing week in, week out in League of Ireland. And as you're going in favourites, you'd expect them to be confident enough to put in their kind of ball playing midfielders, whether it's Watts, Byrne, Burke. Even if it's just introducing one of those and taking out a kind of a sort of defensive minded midfielder to try and have a little bit more of a go. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the approach Bradley takes and try and take the game by the scruff of the neck and go and win it, and don't wait for the opportunities to come. Go and grasp the opportunity that's there, go and try and get the 3 points from the get-go. And the last thing you want in European games, and I've had it in the past, I can remember European games where you thought the opposition were maybe better than they were. You've watched video, you think they're great, you go out there and you realise after 90 minutes, geez, they weren't what we thought. We really should have had a proper go at it. So I'd hate to think Rovers would have any regrets, particularly with this game. Just go, be positive about it, believe that you're the better side, and go and stamp your authority on it. And I think the key players for Rovers over the last number of years, creating chances, making goals, the likes of Jack Byrne, you'd hope they'd be involved from the start and go and take the game to Larne.
Right, so that second Conference League game is going to be live on Thursday, and of course then TNS to follow, and it's a six game league phase as it is now, no longer a group stage. But Shamrock Rovers, as we said, also involved in the title race right here, and of course they've kept themselves in it by beating Drogheda 1-0 away. Dylan Watt scoring a crucial late goal, but it was a game in which the goalkeepers, both Poles and also Drogheda's keeper, played a key role in keeping it 0-0 for so long. But then Dylan Watt sort of out of nowhere with a brilliant goal, Barry.
Yeah, and Drogheda have been a real bogey team for Shamrock Rovers, especially up in Weavers Park, and you got a really good draw down in Tala, James Taylor with the goal down here. And Drogheda had only lost one of the last 13 games, and that last home defeat was to Rovers at the end of May. So it's been a really good game and a lot of big chances in it. But as you said, Denison has been a really good addition to Drogheda. When you look at the Dundalk situation, they've had 4 different goalkeepers, and that has really kind of gone against them. And you look at how solid Denison has been for them. He's been a massive part in the points they have accumulated. And again, on Friday night, he was excellent. And as was Liam Poles, he's kind of come into his own of late, and he's got a bit of confidence from the European games that he's now bringing into the league. But as you said in the game, like James Taylor has a massive chance to put Drogheda 1-0 up, and he skies and puts it over the bar, and kind of they never really had another huge chance since then. They're kind of shots from outside the box, but Dan Cleary's a chance then from 2 yards out of the header to put Rovers into the lead. And by that, they couldn't really break them down. It didn't look like Drogheda had a setback forward with Webster in the centre there. That's just nothing was getting through it. He was heading things away, and it was going to take something of real quality, and that's something that Dylan Watt has in abundance. And that strike is incredible. It always seems to be up in Weavers Park where cracking goals are scored as well. For some reason, such a tight pitch, but that's going in as soon as he hits it, and it leaves Rovers in with a great chance now.
Yeah, and they have Dundalk and Waterford next, and they I think a lot of people have been tipping them to take maximum points from those, but we know the nature of this league, and even how things went in that Drogheda match as well, where they went really pretty much to the wire. And for Shels then, David, I mean, they were on a terrible run of just one win in 8 games, and then they go 1-0 down from a penalty against Waterford at home, and you're kind of wondering, is this unravelling completely? And then up steps Sean Boyd, who I think earlier in the season wasn't really starting that many games, but I think there was a sense from Damien Duff that his time will come, and it certainly is coming now in the most crucial phase of the season.
Yeah, I think probably the break for Shels, I think it's 12 days since they played Shamrock Rovers, and sometimes you just want the next game to roll around. But I think for Shels, probably a break was exactly what they needed. 1, just get a couple of players back, fitness wise, and 2, just have a little bit of a reset, gather your thoughts. And they're still top of the league going into the game, so 3 games to go. Just gather yourself and start again almost. And it was a brilliant atmosphere in Talca right from before kickoff. The fans were really right behind them, and but when the penalty's given away and such just a terrible tackle, I think it was John Martin to give the penalty away, you're just sort of thinking, oh, this isn't looking good. But credit to them, they really battled hard, and as you said, Sean Boyd, I'm a big fan of Sean. Like he's such an impact in games, whether it's from the start or coming on. Just his presence, his height, his strength. There's no centre half in the league, I imagine, that sees him coming on or sees him starting and thinks, oh, this is going to be an easy game. Like he's just going to, even if he's not having a great game, he's going to cause problems. He's going to flick things on. He's going to win things. He's a presence, and he creates the equaliser for himself. You know, he hassles Darragh. He really puts him under pressure. Darragh's trying to probably be too intricate, trying to play it out. Rather than just clearing the ball away, and Sean nicks it and calmly finishes it. You know, they'd swiped at a couple of other opportunities early in the half, sort of tame efforts, but this one, when he gets a clear chance, he slots it home, and brought Shels right back into the game, and they kind of had the momentum then. You felt, you know, at 1-0 Waterford, maybe with not a lot to play for, it's almost a dangerous team. They can go out and enjoy themselves and express themselves, but Shels kind of, you could tell they had something really on the line. They pressed hard. They were quite direct at times, and that's where, I suppose, where Boyd comes in best. You know, they can play directly up to him, particularly when he takes it in on his chest. I think he could have done that a little bit more, but when he takes it in his chest, he gets the player, first of all, he gets Shels up the pitch 5-10 yards further up, and then you can bring your midfield into the game. And he was just a real problem for Waterford throughout the 90 minutes, and his penalty as well finished it brilliantly.
It's a bit too close for comfort, although,
yeah, I
wasn't
think
it?
as he said, it was probably a moment of panic when it hit the bar, but look, it went in. That was the key thing, and look, Conor Kearns made it. Barry probably covered better than me. Conor Kearns made an amazing save. I think it was at 2-1, with his foot, like really kept him in it. Amazing save, really, and then they sealed it with Bert's goal, and they kind of need. I think the likes of Liam Burt, Ali Q, Tulloch. They probably need a little bit more from those guys. You know, we've spoken a lot about Jarvis leaving and missing a spark. I think there's enough talent in those sort of wing areas to create goals and score goals, create opportunities for the likes of Boyd, John Martin, Aidan O'Brien, but they probably haven't been doing enough of that recently. And it's good to see Liam Burt, who's maybe had such a bright start to the season, to come on and get a good goal like that will boost his confidence. And that's what Shels are going to need. They'll need the likes of them producing goals as well as relying on Boyd, because it can't all come from one player. And I think, you know, as we've spoken a lot about Jarvis, but it's up to the other players in those positions to stop us talking about him by producing the goods. And we've seen what Tulloch can do with his goal the other week, and Bert's produced this week, and they'll need that in the next two games. It can't be all on Boyd to get goals. It needs to be spread across those forward areas.
Yeah, because that Conor Kearns save at 2-1, Barry, I mean, there is a sense of release almost. I mean, Burt goes and, you know, scores a good goal at the other end then, and then even Harry Wood hits the bar where he finds himself in a little bit of space. And when you're going into then a next game at Drogheda, which it'll be against Drogheda at Talca Park in their next game, which is going to be, again, another very awkward game. It's those kind of moments and sense of release that maybe sort of helps those creative players come to the fore a bit.
Yeah, and it was kind of skipped by in commentary just how good a save it was, because he's got a split second to decide if he's going with his hand or his foot. And I think if he goes down with his hands, probably spills that into an area where there's oncoming attackers, and he gets a good foot to it, gets it right across that 6-yard box. And as you said, 2 minutes later, it's compounded by going up and scoring down the other end, and it's a huge 3 points. But those little things go unnoticed a little bit. But Conor Kearns, as with Denison at Drogheda, has been such a huge addition to Shelbourne and their resurgence as a team, that he's got those big moments in him.
Yeah, and then of course Derry making sure they're still staying in the title race. 2-0 win at Dundalk. We'll talk about the Dundalk side of things, because that's obviously a sad situation for the club and for their supporters as well. But Colin Whelan with the ball kind of hitting off him and then into the back of the net, and Will Patching with the penalty there. But David, Derry definitely needed that win, especially coming off the back of that Sligo game. But it was one of those where it wasn't particularly free flowing from their point of view, but just needed them to get over the line. Obviously, with the counter that they're going to certainly rue what happened 4 days previously, where they're up against 10 men and just couldn't get it over the line.
Yeah, it's been kind of the last few weeks have been just symptomatic of Derry season. They, you know, a brilliant win in the cup semi-final in Bohemians, real good performance, you know, big players stepping up. You sort of thought maybe they can reproduce that in the next two league games, which are so important, and they couldn't in either. You know, the Sligo game in particular was terrible performance. Like, Sligo dominated them, looked much the better side, particularly in the first half. And then to see Higgins sort of speaking after, saying it'll be a real tough task for them at that point, whether they're tied second in the table. was just slightly unusual. I thought, it's still a great chance to, if they win all their games, their goal difference better than Shamrock Rovers, is still a chance or if they win all their games, they're probably going to win the league. So it was an unusual take to say it's going to be difficult. They do have a tough game in going to St. Pat's next week, but if you want to win the league, you have to go there and win. It's so they're by no means out of it, and it was a big win to go to Dundalk. I know Dundalk were still scrapping for their life to try and stay up, so they still had something to play for, and so it wasn't going to be simple. And I'm sure there were a few heads down in the Derry camp after the 2 results at home against Bohs and Sligo. So it really is an important win for them, and I think going into the weekend's fixtures overall, with the results we've had over the last number of weeks, to think the top 4 would all win probably was unlikely. So, but they've all produced the goods, got a win, and it really bringing it down to the wire. But it sets it up great. I think the game next Friday in Inchicore will be a real cracker between 2 teams that will be absolutely desperate to win the game to keep any chance of the title alive, certainly from Pat's point of view. So yeah, a good win for Derry. Not perfect, but they won't care at this point, particularly after their previous 2 performances.
Yeah, and they'll have to run a tough gauntlet, as David says there, Barry, which is Pats away in the next game, and then of course I think a game that's been marked on the calendar for a long time against Shels on the final day, but they'll have to do it the hard way.
Yeah, absolutely. But these leagues don't come easy, and as David said, their form has been so erratic over this season that the kind of last 6 games have just typified that kind of season. But I think the damage is done. I think there was a kind of, as Dave said, a real awareness from Rory Higgins about what they're going to be facing on Friday night against Pats. I think they're a different animal, and probably at different scales of the confidence charts. Pat's going in on a 7-game winning run, and Derry can't put it by a win really, bar the Dundalk one of late, and that's probably the last team you want to be going up against is Pats, especially in Inchicore. And I just feel that result against Bohs and Sligo, probably their chance gone, because they go in, can't see them get more than a draw against Pats, and that leaves the door open for Rovers and Shels. Obviously it'll just be about stopping Shels on the last day winning it, and that potentially leaves the door open for Shamrock Rovers to nick it.
Yeah, and of course that win for Derry ends Dundalk's tenure in the Premier Division, and there were some angry scenes at full time in Oriel Park. Mark McCadden from the Mirror reporting that there was an interruption during Rory Higgins' post-match huddle, where he writes, "At this point, however, we could see a fracas. A voice then boomed out louder than the rest. There were a few screams too. Several people appeared to be involved on either side of the tunnel that leads into the boardroom, with some holding others back," and they're sort of unedifying scenes. But I suppose, David, as a former player at the club, and we've seen the slide over the season where it seemed inevitable, and now that has occurred, and then on top of that, everything that's happening off the pitch as well. It's a very sad situation for the club. But in terms of the future and what it holds, how pessimistic or otherwise are you?
Pessimistic, I suppose, in terms of, look, there's no harm in going down to the First Division. It happens clubs. It's a sad state of affairs that a club that was doing so well over the last decade and that's being covered by everybody, is now down in the First Division. But Cork City have gone down and bounced straight back. It's not the end of the world. The whole situation behind the scenes is far more concerning than the club being relegated. I think scenes in the stand, obviously not there, just reading the reports that you read, is probably just good, I don't know, perfectly highlights the shambles of a situation that's been there for a number of years. And at times everything looked fine behind the scenes as a player. At times, particularly when Stat Sports and Andy Connolly were back in charge, you felt like the club was on a right footing again, and obviously brought Stevie O'Donnell in as a manager who had done so well at Pats. You felt things are on the up again. But it's just the fact that so much money can be lost, how licenses can still be given out when clubs are so much in debt. There's just so many questions that are kind of unanswered, and it just worries me in terms of the future for the club in general. I think if there's a club there in January, then that's the only thing that'll matter, and that there's a club there that starts next season. The problem is the noises are that may not be the situation, and that's the most concerning thing. And I think for years there's been issues there. Just everybody seems to want to have a dig at the club. There's no coordinated approach between fans and any owner. Each time someone comes in, they promise they'll speak to fans, they'll be involved. It's never worked out that way, and This year, I think it's just been a disaster from the get-go. Obviously, results have been so poor from the start. Signings, probably Barry's mentioned the goalkeeping situation. That's probably one you can just speak of. Obviously, Nathan Shepherd was let go for whatever contractual reasons. There's been probably 4 or 5 keepers that played this year. None of them have been up to the standard you require. And you often see it with teams that get relegated. The goalkeeper is part of a bigger problem. It happened to us previously when I was there. We tried new goalkeepers, it just didn't work, and it really just doesn't help confidence when you're like losing goals too easily from the get-go. And I think the squad's been reasonably competitive. The budget was good, so between management, players, and the backroom staff, it's just not the ownership situation. It's just not been good. But at the end of the day, when players aren't getting played with the last few weeks, and you're lingering at the bottom of the table, it's never going to end well. And as I said, my hope is just that the club, with Temple in charge, that he can somehow stave off the debts that they have and keep the club alive till next season. And but it needs a real concerted effort. You know, fans need to obviously, reading there's a number of different groups involved. They need to get a concerted effort together as one group and try and make sure that the club is there next year.
Yeah, because the 1903 Supporters Club, so they announced that they would fund the academy teams for the rest of the season, as John Temple and the ownership group kind of focus on the first team. But back in mid-September, I think it was the episode on September 16th, which happened on the day that Dundalk's future was really hanging in the balance. Barry, you were on the podcast. You were discussing Scarp as a potential option. At that stage, obviously, the club didn't go down that route. And from the chairperson of the 1903 Supporters Club, Orla Crilly, she says, in terms of the creditors, well, they wouldn't be in favour of Scarp. She kind of says in the sense that it'd be crucial for local businesses and for our own sustainability not to go down that route. But when you look at the options available to Dundalk now in terms of making sure that they're still there in January, what do you feel the route needs to be to go down?
Well, I think John Temple is due to make an announcement early this week, about what his intentions are for the club going forward. But it's just so fractious up there, even in the supporters group, when the only thing that will really save this club is unity and a clear alignment, and it's the total opposite at the moment. And you just look, it's been kind of two-pronged, because they as Dave said, the recruitment has been abysmal from the start of the season. You know, they signed 7 loan players, 4 in the first window and 3 in the second, and that, along with a lot of their players, over half the players come from outside the league, it just doesn't work, you know. And you sack Steve O'Donnell in April, Brian Gartland's gone in July with that Noel King appointment debacle, and as they said, with the 4 different goalkeepers, it's such an essential position that you have to have a really strong goalkeeper and a really strong backup goalkeeper, and that has to be it. But what's gone on there? They're all young goalkeepers as well, and they've been chopping and changing 4 keepers, and then you've got a young lad in Owen Kenny leading the line, and the top scorer has only got 6 goals this season. So when you add that all together, then you know the two-pronged decisions from the club have gone totally wrong this year.
Yeah, we'll see what updates there are in regards to the club this week. But what we do know, of course, they're going to be in the first, well, they are relegated to the first division, and we'll see what the future holds in the longer term. But Pats also keeping themselves just about in the title race. Aidan Keena with a couple of goals to beat Galway United 2-1. And I suppose, David, looking at the goals that Pats scored, and it's illustrative of the impact Stephen Kenny has had there, but it's the build-up play, I think, for both the goals that Keena finishes off that really, really does catch the eye.
Yeah, Forrester's kind of been instrumental in the both, I think, and but very Stephen Kenny-esque, I suppose. You know, they get the ball down and willing to play, and you know, cut Galway open twice for the goals. And Keena's obviously shown in his season with Sligo how clinical he can be. He's sort of been in and out with the form of Mason Mealy over the last few weeks, but you know, Pats have 2 excellent options up top, and Keena's finishing was, well, the second one's simple enough, but the first one's a brilliant finish just across the goalkeeper. And as I said, brilliant slide reel pass on both occasions leading up to those goals from Forrester. And yeah, look, they're players, when you're winning and you're in good form, all these things come really, really easily to you. And you know, Stephen's got them all playing in a brilliant way. And I think a couple of injuries there to their wingers maybe be an area of concern for them going into next week. And because he's kept such a settled team over the last number of weeks, it's been 1 or 2 have had to, you know, Bulger's come in for Jamie Lennon last week and a couple of odd changes, but generally their team's been pretty solid, and that's probably a sign of Kenny, I suppose. He has his 11 normally, you know, if you're in or out, and they've been very consistent in that in the run that they've had of 7 back-to-back wins. So yeah, the goals were excellent. They're playing with a real spark. They're the team that's obviously in form, and it sets up, as I said earlier, for a brilliant game against Derry next week.
Yeah, and they'll certainly need a favour if they are going to get over the line in the title race from the clubs ahead of them. But Galway also, Barry, will need a favour in terms of the European race as well. Although, of course, probably worth noting as well, Ed McCarthy's goal was brilliant against Pats. But in terms of trying to get into the top 3 or 4, depending on how many places do end up going to Europe at the end, they will need a little bit of help from a couple of clubs above.
Yeah, and it was great to see the kind of clash of styles with Galway and Friday night, and they've kind of gone away from that kind of long ball stuff, and they've got some really good players, and that, as you said, that Ed McCarthy strike is as good as any you'll see all year, and they probably found themselves unlucky not to come away with something in that game, and it's probably just the last couple of games they've been a little bit off where they've been all season, and it's probably coming at a bad time for them, but said they're still right in there, and they've got a great chance. It'll be seen as an unbelievable season anyway, what they've done, and if they can go and top it off with the European place, that'll be just incredible.
Yeah, and Bohemians on Saturday then beating Sligo Rovers 2-0, Dawson Devoy, and then Meekison with the goal that kind of sealed their safety for the season. But it's been a very up and down season for Bohs, David, at the same time, and lots of decisions to make before next season. Whereas on the other, I suppose on the flip side for Sligo Rovers as well, in terms of Europe, that's more or less done and dusted.
Yeah, I think even with Galway, I think the top 4 winning last week sort of would make you think it's going to be those 4 in those top 4 positions. Now, obviously, Europe will come down to Derry winning the cup or not, but yeah, it's a brilliant season for Sligo, I suppose. Looking at the squads early in the season, it was sort of the dog draw Sligo with the bottom 3 in the early sort of form, and it felt like it was going to be a battle between those 3 to who would be finish bottom, who would be in the playoff place, and but Sligo mid-season just kicked on and really put in some brilliant performances. I think mid-season they won 3 in a row, maybe away at Talca was 1. Like, they really put in some brilliant performances, and as I said, the performance against Derry last week was really top class. The difficulty for them is they couldn't back it up when they played Bohs at home. They're probably second in terms of quality to Bohs the other night, and so yeah, the job, I think John Russell came into the season under pressure, after the end of last season. They hadn't finished particularly well, and there was a lot of criticism when they let McGinty go mid-season, and he's come back again and been brilliant. I think it was just cut their costs at the end of last season when they knew they weren't going to qualify for Europe. But this year, I think, Russell deserves huge credit. He'd be right up there for sort of manager of the season awards for the squad that they've had and the performance that they put in this year. But the other night, in fairness to Bohs, I think you could tell there was more at stake for them. They knew a win would keep them safe, and it's an unusual one with Bohs. They're playing with no striker. They've I think 7 or 8 centre mids that would all be clambering for a starting spot in that squad. Obviously 1 or 2 out, like Keith Buckley's out at the moment long term, but they've real quality in the midfield area, and they obviously feel they're strongest by playing an extra midfielder in there to try and dominate the game, and it worked for them the other day. They were on top. They sort of had a lot of the ball, but early on you saw a great chance for Dale Rooney, puts in a brilliant ball to Clark for a header, and he sort of fluffs it where you thought if that was a ruthless striker, they're 1-0 up. And I think that's cost them in games across the season where they have, even the Pats game the other week, they had a lot of the ball. People were saying they looked really good, but they couldn't score. So you gain something by dominating a lot. You have a lot of possession. It looks good, but on the other end, you need the ruthlessness of a 15-goal striker to help you get over the line in games. So I think they're still finding that balance. As I said, it worked for them the other night, and Archie Meekson looks like a good signing for them. He's been sharp in any games I've seen for Bohs recently, and he took the second goal very well as well. And Devoy, obviously, I think has been a brilliant addition for them mid-season. He'll lift the quality in that midfield, even though they have a lot already. He seems to be the one really thriving at the moment. So for them next season, I think they've a good base there. I mean, the midfield options, as I've covered, are really, really good. I think defensively they'll want to bring in 1 or 2, and definitely a front man. And you'd say, even though their form hasn't been good and they're third bottom, I don't think they're a million miles away from being able to push a lot higher up this league. That the teams are so tight. We've seen it with Shels this year. They've gone from sort of mid-table right up to the top. I don't think Bows are that far away. I'm not saying that they will be there next year. It's a big window for them, I think, in the winter. But they certainly have the potential to be, with the likes of Devoy and Tierney coming back. If they can make a couple of crucial signings, they're not a million miles away. I think as a fan, I know the fans are hugely frustrated with how the season's gone, but to be slightly optimistic, certainly I would, if I was a Bows fan, I'd be optimistic about where they could be next year.
Yeah, and next year is next year, but this weekend obviously is looming large. We've got Shelbourne against Drogheda United live on RT2 and the RT Player coverage from 7:30, and again a huge weekend of action. Galway United playing Sligo Rovers, Waterford against Bowes, and of course that huge game between Pats and Derry as well on the same night, and then Shamrock Rovers, who of course are playing Larne on Thursday. Then their game against Dundalk is on Sunday. An emotional game for Dundalk as well at Oriel Park, given everything that's happened there. But Barry, looking at that and looking into this weekend, again, I suppose every week becomes pivotal. I think that goes without saying. But if Shels can beat Drogheda, and that's not a given how strong Drogheda can be and just how awkward this point of the season is, if they can do that and put pressure on Rovers, who play on Sunday, but then also on Pats and Derry playing at the same time elsewhere at Richmond Park, like it could be hugely decisive.
Yeah, I can see them beating Drogheda on Friday, but it'll be fairly similar to the performance against Waterford. I think Drogheda massively missed Piero up front against Rovers, and I'm not sure whether they'll risk him going into that game on Friday with the cup final and the playoff looming large as well at the end of the month. So it'll be a different sort of performance, I think, from Shels. I think they'll go back to front quicker than they did. They played a little bit too much football maybe the other night, and I thought when Damien saw that back four for Waterford and only won over 6 foot, that they might go a little bit earlier to Sean Boyd, and I think he'll really kind of throw the footballing side of things out the window on Friday and go back to front earlier on and get those chances to get John Martin up beside him, maybe O'Brien on earlier up beside him, goes the two up top and put real pressure on that Drogheda defence. And I think that they'll have one eye on those cup finals, on yellow cards, on suspensions, on injuries, and I think this is a great time to be playing a Drogheda side in Talca Park and in what could be a huge moment, because you go and win there and it's really in your hands going into the last day, because I just don't see Derry going to Pats and getting anything more than a draw, and I think that sets it up. That's Derry out of the equation for going into the last game, and then it's just up to them to stop Shels. And I just think Rovers will go and dispose of Dundalk, no matter what the situation is up there. I think they'll do the business and have done over the years when it comes to these sort of games, and bring it to the last day, and it'll be between those two, I think, for the last day to go and win it.
Yeah, you mentioned the playoffs there in terms of the promotion relegation. Of course, we know the picture in terms of the first division playoffs anyway, the semi-finals to begin with, and Bray Wanderers against UCD. They're playing the first leg on Thursday, 7:45 kickoff, and then same time Athlone Town are at home to Wexford. David, first on Bray and UCD, how do you expect this one to play out?
That's a tough one. That's a derby, technically, isn't it? Yeah, it's
with a county boundary in between.
Yeah. Between the obviously Cork City side, it's been really tight in the first division between quite a number of sides. Watching Wexford the other week in the cup semi-final, covering the game, they were very, very good on the day. So it just shows the levels, and obviously Drogheda are going to be the opponent for whoever gets through. So it was a good sort of barometer of where these teams will be when they face Drogheda. For Bray and UCD, it's a tough one to call, to be honest. Hopefully with Finner's experience in there as an ex-UCD man, I'd like to see them challenging back to try and get back in the top league. And but I think any of these teams, to be honest, could come through this playoff. There's no standout. Nobody's been well ahead, like Cork City have been. They're all very, very tight. It makes it such a tough way to get through, particularly for a team that has finished second, to try and get through and then have to face Drogheda after that. So I think any of these four teams could pull through, Raf.
Yeah, and Barry, just on the Wexford going to Athlone, we saw them in the cup semi-final against Drogheda, and they gave a really, really good account of themselves.
Wexford have a couple of great players. Aaron Dobbs up front has got goals in them, and that's what you obviously need this time of the season. But I just feel it'll be UCD in the UCD Bray game. I think they'll have enough to get through, and I think it was such a poor result for Athlone at the weekend, getting beaten by Kerry 2-0, and instead of facing Wexford, you would have been facing Bray, and that gives you a great chance to get into a playoff final, to have the chance of playing Drogheda. But it was a really poor result. I think that that'll go against them. I think Wexford will just have enough for them to get past that loan, and then it'll be them and UCD for a chance to play Drogheda, and I've played in that playoff relegation battle. It's just, there's nothing worse as a team coming down from the Premier trying to hold their status in the Premier Division, and it's a little bit different this year because usually the side at the bottom of the Premier League coming down is on a poor run of form, but Drogheda aren't. They're on a great run of form, and they'll have a cup final behind them as well, and the exhilaration of playing in that. And I think it'd be really tough for any of these 4 teams getting through to play Drogheda. But as I said, it's a one-off playoff final, and everyone has a chance going into it.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I mean, very early days in the playoffs at this stage, but Champions League as well. We're going to have RB Leipzig against Liverpool live on RT2 and the RT Player on Wednesday, with highlights afterwards. Plus, highlights of all the week's Champions League games will be available to watch on rte.ie/sport and the RTÉ Sport YouTube channel, so you can keep an eye on that. But Barry, I suppose from a Liverpool point of view in the league, we saw their first sort of big test against Chelsea. I think arguably some of their first games under Arne Slot in the league. There was a sense that, you know, it's not necessarily a soft start, but they weren't meeting some of the big clubs. But now they're going to be in a run where they're coming up against the likes of Arsenal next week, and more of a test of where they're at in the post Klopp era. But I suppose first off, I wanted to touch on the Irish point of view, and Caoimhin Kelleher getting an opportunity in a run of games now as number one with Alisson out, and I suppose coming off the back of a international break which ended probably on a bit of a sour note out in Greece with the mistake, and then you need to reset. You know, you're being pummeled by Greece in a certain sense in a game, and then you're coming up with a Liverpool with a very sort of settled defence and different levels of concentration, which I suppose as a goalkeeper you can appreciate.
Yeah, and he's been brilliant anytime he's stepped in for Liverpool. You know, obviously he's made that mistake out in Greece, but that was a circumstance of the occasion. I think it was where we were in the game at that time. He's trying to get the ball out quickly to go and mount a last attack, and obviously gives it away in a terrible position, and they score from it. But he'll take real confidence from the way he played in that game, and I think he did well in the game for Liverpool, and he always has done in other sides. When you see another number 2 coming in, there always seems to be downgrading in performance really as a goalkeeper coming in, but there never has been with Caoimhin coming in, and Alisson is injured so much that he gets an awful lot of opportunities to come in and play as well, and you just wonder whether Slot would have made that decision to sign a new goalkeeper had he got to see Caoimhin Kelleher enough in person to go and make a real judgment on him. And you just wonder now with Alisson, will he be there long term? Is there a decision for Caoimhin to say maybe I'll hold rank here and hold on long enough to see if I do get a chance to play? But as I said, he's been really good since he's come in and played well under Slot.
Yeah, and of course Liverpool winning 2-1 against Chelsea, David. So they have got over the test in terms of results. What did you make of the overall performance from what you saw of them?
Yeah, it was a strange enough game. Obviously, so used to the Klopp side that was sort of
heavy metal,
just end to end and attack kind of. And Slot's obviously a very different style, more composed, keep the ball, and they were obviously willing to let Chelsea have possession at times and you know, counter attack them and then, you know, play from there if they needed to. And so it was interesting. It's particularly the last sort of 20 odd minutes of the game. It felt like they saw the game out quite comfortably in a way that they definitely never did under Klopp. Even if they were 1-0 up, it was like they were still trying to score all the time. Never had the calmness to see the game out, which is fine. That's an approach. Obviously, it's worked brilliantly for them under Klopp, but it's definitely a different end to the game where they sort of happy to sit behind it, keep the ball, and try and just see the pressure out. And they obviously managed to do that. So it was a good game. I thought Liverpool started kind of brightly and made good opportunities. The injury to Jota was sort of a changing point because he's been so good for them, and Nunes has to come in, obviously being away on international duty in South America. I assume like McAllister and others, they were purposely not started, so I had to throw him in a little bit earlier. But he was good in the game, created the brilliant opportunity for Jones. That was the overturned penalty. And Jones and Gravenberch, I thought, particularly Gravenberch, Jones got a lot of plaudits on the day, but I thought Gravenberch, he's obviously done well since the start of the season, but particularly the other day, he just takes it under pressure and alleviates in that number 6. He's able to dribble with it. He can drive at teams. And you would think Liverpool would need a real, you're kind of used to thinking a number 6, a real tough tackling midfielder, but he's still able to break up play. But it's it's the fact he can bring the ball forward as well from that sixth position. I just think he's been brilliant for them, especially after they missed out on their signing over the summer. But you wouldn't know it the way he's performed. And yeah, I think, as you said, it's a big test for Slot. They've lost one game, which is the Forest match. They've reacted really, really well to that. I think with Arsenal away next week, it was important to try and win this game, particularly with Arsenal slipping up as well. So it was, I think, all around a good weekend for Liverpool in general. And yeah, they'll certainly go into next week's game against Arsenal. Well, obviously they've Leipzig first in the Champions League, and then next week against Arsenal. So huge games coming up for them.
Yeah, and they probably would have been, an Arsenal too, as the title, that's the two likely title chasers, would have been happier if Man City had been held by Wolves, Barry. But of course, John Stones comes up with another big late goal for City, and you know, again, I suppose City and Pep sort of get out of jail in that sense. But there's a bit of controversy about the goals. The winner, Wolves weren't happy about it. Certainly their manager Gary O'Neill wasn't best pleased. VAR had a look at it, but in the end, and maybe from a goalkeepers union point of view, I know you have a spoiler alert, have a slightly different view on it. Yeah. Jose Sa maybe felt he was impeded by his countryman Bernardo Silva, but in your view, it wasn't really the case. There isn't a huge excuse there.
No, I think I'll be kicked out of the union. But no, I don't think there is. When I first saw it, I thought, yeah, there's something there. He's gotten away, and if he's offside, then he's definitely the goal to be disallowed. But when you watch it back in slow motion, Sa has his position set. He's on the line, and Bernardo Silva's ducked a good second or two as the ball's passing over his head, and he's got a great side of it. So he just can't get his hands up quick enough to go and prevent it going into the net. So for me, it's the right decision, and he was obviously playing really well as well all game. So he made a couple of really impressive saves, but just nothing he could do about that one.
Yeah, and of course that leaves Liverpool top of the table with City right behind them, and then Arsenal, of course, dropping points, 2-0 defeat at Bournemouth when they were down to 10 men. But that brings us to a close today. So, of course, Liverpool at Leipzig in the Champions League live on RTÉ on Wednesday, and then, of course, on Friday, the Ireland women's starting off their first leg of the playoff against Georgia as well, live on RTÉ2 and the RTÉ player as well. Barry Murphy and David McMillan, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Raf.